Williams couldn't see. Something was pouring into his eyes, and that's when he noticed a gash on his forehead.
I didn't know if it was blood. I didn't know if it was brains. I didn't know if it was flesh. I didn't know what it was. I just knew I was in trouble. At that point, I grabbed a life jacket. I was on the aft lifeboat deck. There were 2 functioning lifeboats at my disposal right there. But I knew I couldn't board them. I had responsibilities.
His responsibility was to report to the bridge, the rig's command center.
I'm hearing alarms. I'm hearing radio chatter, mayday, mayday, mayday. We've lost propulsion. We've lost power. We have a fire. Man overboard on the starboard forward deck.
Multiple personnel on water. Any person in the vicinity for help will be really appreciated.
Williams says that on the bridge he watched them try to activate emergency systems.
The BOP that was supposed to protect us and keep us from the blowout obviously had failed, and now the emergency disconnect to get us away from this fuel source has failed. We have no communications to the BOP. And I see one of the lifeboats in the water, and it's motoring away from the vessel. I looked at the captain and asked him, I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I've given the order to abandon ship."
Every Sunday they had practice lifeboat drills and the procedure for making sure that everyone was accounted for. But in the panic, all that went to hell. The lifeboats were leaving.
They're leaving without you?
They have left without the captain and without knowing that they had everyone that had survived all this on board. I've been left now by 2 lifeboats. And I look at the captain and I said, "What do we do now?" By now, the fire is not only on the derrick, it's starting to spread to the deck. At that point, there were several more explosions, large, intense explosions.
What do they feel like, sound like?
It just take your breath away type explosions, shake your body to the core explosions, take your vision away from the percussion of the explosions.
About 8 survivors were left on the rig. They dropped an inflatable raft from a crane, but with only a few of the survivors on the raft, it was launched, leaving Williams, another man, and a crewwoman named Andrea.
I remember looking at Andrea and seeing that look in her eyes of she had quit, she had given up. I remember her saying, "I'm scared." And I said, "It's okay to be scared. I'm scared too." She said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "We're going to burn up or we're going to jump."
How far is it to the sea?
Maybe 90 feet, 100 feet. It's a long ways.
In the middle of the night, with blood in his eyes, fire at his back, and the sea 10 stories below, Williams made his choice.
I remember closing my eyes and saying a prayer and asking God to tell my wife, little girl, that Daddy did everything he could. And if I survive this, it's for a reason. I made those 3 steps, and I pushed off into the rig. And I fell for what seemed like forever. A lot of things go through your mind. I went down way below the surface, obviously. When I popped back up, I felt like, okay, I've made it. But I feel this god-awful burning all over me. And I'm thinking, am I on fire? You know, I just don't know. So I start doing the only thing I know to do, swim. I got to get away from this thing. I could tell I was floating in oil and grease and diesel fuel. I mean, it was just the smell. And I remember looking under the rig and seeing the water on fire. And I thought, what have you done? You were dry and you weren't covered in oil up there. Now you've jumped and you've made this and you've landed in oil. The fire's going to come across the water and you're going to burn up. And I thought, that you just got to swim harder. So I swam. And I kicked and I swam and I kicked and I swam as hard as I could until I remember not feeling any more pain. And I didn't hear anything. And I thought, well, I must have burned up because I don't feel anything. I don't hear anything. I don't smell anything. I must be dead. Then I remember a real faint voice of, over here, over here. And I thought, what in the world is that? And the next thing I know, he grabbed my life jacket and flipped me over into this small, open-bowed boat. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know where he'd come from. I didn't care. I was now out of the water.
William's survival may be critical to the investigation. We took his story to Dr. Bob B., a professor of engineering at the University of California, Berkeley. Last week, the White House asked B. to help analyze the Deepwater Horizon accident. B. investigated the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster for NASA and the Hurricane Katrina disaster for the National Science Foundation. B's voice never completely recovered from the weeks that he spent in the flood in New Orleans, but as the White House found, he's among the nation's best. He's investigated more than 20 offshore rig disasters.
Mr. Williams comes forward with these very detailed elements from his viewpoints on the rig. That's a brave and intelligent man.
What he's saying is very important to this investigation, you believe?
It is.
What strikes Professor B. is Mike Williams' description of the blowout preventer. Williams says that in a drilling accident 4 weeks before the explosion, the critical rubber gasket called an annular was damaged, and pieces of it started coming out of the well.
According to Williams, when parts of the annular start coming up onto the deck, someone from Transocean says, look, don't worry about it. What does that tell you?
Houston, I think we have a problem.
Here's why that's so important. The annular is used to seal the well for pressure tests, and those tests determine whether dangerous gas is seeping in.
So if the annular is damaged, if I understand you correctly, you can't do the pressure tests in a reliable way.
That's correct. You may get pressure test recordings, but because you're leaking pressure, they're not reliable.
Mike Williams also told us that a backup control system to the blowout preventer called a pod had lost some of its functions.
What is the standard operating procedure if you lose one of the control pods on the BOP?
Reestablish it, fix it. It's like losing one of your legs.
The morning of the disaster, according to Williams, there was an argument in front of all of the men on the shift between the Transocean manager and the BP manager. Do you know what that argument was about?
Yes.
What was it?
Who's boss?
In finishing the well, the plan was to have a subcontractor, Halliburton, place 3 concrete plugs, like corks, in the column. The Transocean manager wanted to do this with the column full of heavy drilling fluid, what drillers call mud, to keep the pressure down below contained. But the BP manager wanted to begin to remove the mud before the last plug was set. That would reduce the pressure controlling the well before the plugs were finished.
Why would BP want to do that?
It expedites the subsequent steps.
It's a matter of going faster.
Faster, sure.
Who won the argument?
BP.
If the mud had been left in the column, would there have been a blowout?
It doesn't look like it.
To do it BP's way, they had to be absolutely certain that the first 2 plugs were keeping the pressure down. That life or death test was done using the blowout preventer, which had the damaged gasket. Investigators have also found that the BOP had a hydraulic leak and a weak battery.
Weeks before the disaster, they know that they are drilling into a very dangerous formation. The formation has told them that.
That's correct.
And has cost them millions of dollars.
That's correct.
And they know the BOP is broken.
Correct.
Broken in a number of ways.
Correct.
What is the appropriate thing to do at that point?
I express it to my students this way. It's stop, think, don't do something stupid.
They didn't stop. As the drilling fluid was removed, relieving the downward pressure, the plugs failed. The blowout preventer didn't work, and 11 men were incinerated. 115 crew members survived. 2 days later, the Deepwater Horizon sank to the bottom.